Good morning, everybody, and good morning to those who are on the internet following this web stream. We have a session which we have to conclude at 9:45. So I am instructed by Gary, and I will execute the order. And there are two parts. I will make my own talk on disruptive leadership, and we have Alexander Lipatan here, who will, as a panelist, further amplify points. I would like to start with where I left yesterday, and you recall the slide. It's about how cycles might impact our life, and without trying to pretend that I have a crystal ball, or probably anyone in this room has a crystal ball, it would be good to see whether certain waves coming back and hitting us again and again are a normal phenomenon of our life, or are we at the end of history where what was past is the past and future is totally different. My own take on these issues is that yes, there are ups and downs, and when historically the downs came, I gave three contextual points: World War I, Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, and the beginning of the 1980s, and I gave 1983 as a reference here. We were utterly unprepared to handle those situations, and it was a question in the First World War case that missed opportunities and lost opportunities and the lack of leadership left us collectively with 30 million dead. In the case of the other two cases, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was a mix of leadership. Yes, there was leadership shown, but a great degree of luck had to be mixed to that leadership to survive those moments. And in the 1980s, at least in the context of 1983, it was a tremendous amount of luck that all of us are here. The question for disruptive leadership, as a title of my talk, is how far we are ready to go through a real life stress test of that caliber. In case we take some of the comments historically made about the inevitability of a crisis or a set of crises growing into a major socioeconomic calamity, are we better prepared or not this time? I would like to recall that while I am coming to this table from the background of weapons of mass destruction technologies and their regulation and multilateral diplomacy, as for the repetition of cycles, there was a very interesting reference in the book This Time is Different by Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhardt, where they are speaking about 800 centuries of folly, financial meltdowns, and calamities in the financial economic world repeating themselves for 800 years. Here probably we are speaking about 8 millennia of follies, as for the wider security area. The way ahead, as I see, is, of course, the right mix of positive thinking, at the same time assessing in a sober way what might lie ahead of us in case the difficulties are increasing. I would like to structure my talk I might need help with releasing the PowerPoint.
Just click on the screen to activate the power.
Okay. While speaking about disruptive leadership, and this is the title for which I feel a bit responsible for, what I had on mind is that a remix of best practices of leadership might not be sufficient in a time which I try to allude to, when there is a real life stress test collectively endured. Because of that, for me, disruptive leadership is a leadership which is disrupting disruptive events. I hope it's still clear what I mean. The case for a New Deal is, in my mind, something we have to explore when addressing how we might be better prepared. When I am speaking about leadership, and you will see it from the ensuing slides, I do not refer to one person or one group of people. And this is part of this disruptive leadership. I will be speaking about 3 layers, 3 dimensions, how we can address a better preparedness for a real-time stress test when it comes again. Those are the people. This is the best reference point to describe what I mean. The society as a whole. The economy, and here what I mean more the real economy, the business part of the economy, and IGOs stand for Intergovernmental Organization. Originally, I had sequencing where I started with the economy, going to the IGOs and going to the people, and I understood very quickly how wrong it is. I think we have to have a clear focus for whom we are deploying all these tools of improved leadership. I would like to look into the why and the what and the how. So if my proposition is that what is needed, a global new deal, then we have to address not just the New Deal, but the rationale, the requirements for it, what it exactly means in the time frame of course, the 1 minute I might have under each and every box, and some of the modalities, how it might be undertaken. So let me start with the first layer and the first dimension of this need for a global New Deal. You will recall the 1930s when the New Deal was implemented on a nation basis. The situation, fortunately, is not as dire today as it was back as a result of the 1929-1933 Great Depression. At the same time, in keywords, number 1, we have dysfunctionality of distribution. It can be perceived on a national, sub-regional, regional, or even on a global basis. And there are certain numbers which are expressing it, and probably for economists who are the real economists unlike me, there is a reason why it's so difficult to reignite the global economy and national economies.
Sorry, we must have some problem with the connection. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Please. They've switched us because we're not broadcasting. Okay, not back, but please, anybody who's on computer should be on dormitory, not on CAS. Please check, because it's causing me stress.
Disrupted connection.
Disruptive connection.
Dormitory is not included yet?
Pardon me?
Dormitory is not allowed?
No, dormitory is fine, not CAS.
Okay.
As soon as, this makes a big difference on the network. They tell us as soon as we get off of CAS, everything's fine. Okay, I think you should be okay. I'm moving.
Say goodbye and good Easter because I'm
You know where you are?
45 and I have to leave to catch my train.
Just to resume, and sorry for this delay, the global dysfunctionality of distribution might be one of the reasons why it is so difficult to reignite economies and the global economy. Lost generation. For the last more than 7 years by now, there is a generation which had no first jobs and had no jobs at all. We are speaking about 20 to 50% of the population, depending where we are. And as a combination of these two elements, we are in many countries or in certain regions sitting on a ticking bomb, again under a scenario if the future of the economies is not as optimistic as some of us would like to see. In case there is no pickup of the economic activities, there is a further deterioration of the combination of these elements and their impact. With many shortcuts, if we come to the economy and if we try to address the rationale for this global New Deal, number one, what was originally a crisis grew into a cluster of crises. So we are speaking about a proliferation to many new areas of the crisis phenomenon. And the question is, under a not so good case scenario, not right now, but if the cluster of crises prevail and we are not able collectively to move out of this stagnation phase for the next couple of years, whether the crisis in plural might lead to something more severe, which I describe as a socio-economic crash. And the question here is there a potential correlation between what is referred to as a socio-economic crash and the type of calamities I put on the first slide? Without trying to link these two phenomena too close, my own feeling is that if these two downward cycles come together and coincide, it might geometrically compound the complexities we are collectively facing. It is a lose-lose situation for the economy and for the business. So besides the tragic numbers we historically inherited, of course there is no need to explain why for the business activities this is a scenario not to have again. I call it a lose-lose scenario. Beyond the tragic potential human destruction, of course, in all these calamities, a significant proportion of national and regional and global GDPs were wiped out. and there was a redistribution of the rest, which was not probably the redistribution pattern the business and the economic community would like to see. An additional element besides the rationale for a New Deal to handle a worst case scenario ahead of us if it happens is right now we are facing a resource deficit to address those issues which will have to be resolved to move ourselves out of the dire straits. This resource deficit is related, number one, already to the real economy itself. Again, not being an economist, but it's not easy to foresee in case additional injection of quantitative ease might be required, what would be globally the source of another, let's say, $3 trillion, globally speaking. There is a resource deficit in quite a number of other areas as well. We touched upon yesterday the other bottom lines. One is the Sustainable Development Goals as encapsulating quite a number of areas. I'm referring to this cluster for the ease of convenience as sustainable development issues with 17 different subclusters. There is a wide number of unresolved issues which do contribute, if they remain unresolved, to a persistent crisis in plural, globally speaking, and the difficulties to put behind us some of the socio-economic challenges. The price tag to address these issues is varying within a range of what I encountered 3 to 5% of the global GDP if I set aside the climate change price tag. The climate change cluster itself is or would require another 5 to 10% of the global GDP to address those issues in a structured and preventive way. And then we might be adding an additional other items, and it's absolutely clear that there is a huge deficit to address issues in a way where the resources are aligned with the type of tasks which we are facing. In addition to the resource deficit, negative externality is an element which I would like to mention. We all recall negative externalities are negative impacts created by normal business activities. Environment is a good example when, as a result of environmental activities, there is a release of pollution. This is not the original intention of the activities, but this is impacting the wider society. And in case this bill created is not picked up, this is the negative externalities which is left behind by the society. The negative externalities remains an issue which, in my judgment, is increasing in its amplitude, especially if, and this is a next reference point, if we see that the economies are going in the direction where they are going. Supranational is a dimension where the economies are heading. One reference point here is the ongoing talks of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Yesterday, in my talk, I mentioned in the context of intergovernmental organizations fatigue, and here in the context of the real economy, the regulation fatigue is a phenomenon which is there as well. The business community and many economists do not consider that the situation would require further regulations the other way around. The feeling is that the regulation in place the better the prospects of a recovery. So this is an element which we'll have to take into account, especially in the intersection of areas where negative externalities, the lack of resources, and the regulation fatigue is coming together. Intergovernmental organizations. These are simplified shorthand references for the rationale for a global New Deal, but unfit for purpose of crash prevention is my very first item. In case there is a severe real-life stress test, the type of situation I was referring on the first slide. The organizations which are there are not able to cope with the magnitude of those crises. Whether we would like to pronounce these words or not, this is the situation. So we have to take it into account, especially when we again recall the triple fatigue I mentioned earlier. Number one, regulation fatigue in the intergovernmental organization world as well, where it's more and more difficult in any of the thematic areas, be it financial organizations, be it environmental organizations, be it organizations which are responsible for any of the thematic issues. It's more and more difficult to put in place regulations which might be needed. The IGO fatigue itself, there is a feeling that the time has gone for these dinosaurs, as sometimes they are referred to. So we are speaking about arrangements embodying 200 up to 200 players. Yes, it's an extremely complicated setting for decision making, especially if it is a consensus decision making. And yes, there are many failures. And the feeling is that instead of trying our chances at 200, it's better to try to resolve issues at a lower number. And those numbers might be 50, those numbers might be 40, 200 might become 20, or sometimes 200 might become 2. So there is a certain fatigue with the all-inclusive intergovernmental organizations, and the third element is the cooperation fatigue. So there is a feeling that putting more emphasis on more robust tools from the toolbox, setting aside cooperation as a tool, and inclining on raw might be a more efficient mix. And again, this is an important part in the life of intergovernmental organizations, why they are not fit for purpose to address difficult times in case they come. Coming to the next column, what might it entail to undertake a global New Deal in light of the challenges in case they become worst case challenges? The absence of a generation from the real economy, the young generation, is raising a question of distribution dysfunctionality, and it's a question of how to integrate that generation into our life. One way of doing it might be, and I emphasize this is only one way, is to deploy this important segment of the society. And again, we are speaking about 20 to 50% of the population, of the working population of each and every country, to work what is described here, the commons. The commons means, with another reference, is global challenges. Those issues which are transboundary problems, but issues which are more and more defining the way we can move ahead or we cannot move ahead. So there is an issue of absence of resources or sufficient resources on one hand. There is an issue of mounting challenges on the other side of the equation. And there is a third element, the many unemployed who by now practically for a decade cannot find their first workplace and remain unemployed. In the context of Africa, in the context of developing countries, we are speaking about this 20 to 50% as a lower number in countries where the overwhelming part of the population is younger than 25. Some West African countries, 80% of the population is represented by this part of the paper. So Empower Through Work for the Commons is very similar to the original notion of the New Deal. That is, to give some meaningful task on a massive scale to those people who are in dire strait. Of course, it will have to be economically sound. So one cannot upset the way the economy is functioning. But again, these are three unresolved issues, and there is a need to address them. On the economy and on the real economy, there are a couple of issues which might be too shocking for you. Of course, by now you might have been shocked by this New Deal concept. What I am speaking about is more an end goal. I do not want to use the phrases of President Obama, not in my lifetime when he was speaking about nuclear disarmament, for example. But as a goal, we should pursue it. I think we will have to move in this direction progressively. And it's important that we see some of the yardsticks which are needed to be better prepared for future difficulties. Internalized negative externalities, terrible phrase, but for a slide where I have limited space, that was the only way I could compress the notion. It means that those who are creating the liabilities will have to be part of the solution of those liabilities. It might not be a popular theme, but again, if we go back to the lose-lose scenario, if we go back to how much eventually the collective bill might become in case these issues are not resolved, some of these numbers which might require the business community on a real economic basis to consider in its activities some of the externalities, negative externalities, then it might be more reasonable. There is a reference to it in the context of the climate change, how the business community might be taxed for certain activities which are creating a pollution. So we are speaking about quite a number of other pollutions than the environmental pollution, certain risk created, certain liabilities. So there is a need progressively, and I emphasize this word progressively, to pick up the bill. Multiply positive externalities. There is a positive side of the real economy when it is impacting especially in a transboundary mode all of us. One example is the tech companies and whatever new possibilities they are creating for education, for example. It's not necessarily the primary purpose of the technological advances, but by now we are speaking about disruptive education as a result of the combination of these positive externalities created by the technological companies. There is a need to multiply them. There is a need to focus on them in a structured way. And there is a need to invest probably more to make a better use of those externalities. The business community, together with the rest of us, will have to have a look at issues which are beyond externalities issues, again, challenges which are out there, and challenges which do not have the right alignment of resources. The areas which are relevant for the type of activities which might be joined by the business community in the context of a global New Deal, it would be the real economy itself. So I mentioned in the context of the negative externalities that these are real economic activities which are left unattended. In addition to that, again, with cluster references, sustainable development, environment, I added dangerous technologies as well. If you just take as an example nuclear energy, there is a need to address issues seriously going beyond nuclear weapons. The potential high reliance on plutonium, for example, where under certain scenarios the reliance on weapon-grade plutonium as a result of reprocessing might increase 20-30-fold compared to where we are. And the annual put-through of plutonium per globally speaking is 3 times higher than the overall number of nuclear weapons at the height of the Cold War. 200,000 weapons worth of plutonium per year reprocessed. So these are the type of things, take it as an example, which would require an attention among the areas where, again, a new global, a new deal globally might involve the business community. On what should be done by intergovernmental organizations with some shortcuts, I call it reinventing the intergovernmental organizations. I don't think that they are dinosauruses in case we would like to move forward in the right direction, even in a dire state situation. For that, there is a need for those organizations to reinvent themselves. And under the modalities, I can make a couple of points. And there is a need not to write them off, be it in the context of the environment, be it in the context of other issues, trade, finance. Instead of moving away from all-inclusive arrangements toward other arrangements, I think giving up these all-inclusive fora would be a big mistake in light of the transboundary challenges we are facing. More but smarter regulations, we don't have the time to discuss in many of the areas. I don't have the expertise to do that. But practically the motto could be not less is more, but more is more. The modalities. Again, we as an absence of time and space, we are using, and I'm using, short references. At the level of what I described as the younger generation, but I would very quickly add the generation of people who are 60, 65 and above. This is an increasing slice of the society. So as a combination of these two ideal segments of society, which again might be more than half of the society in a number of countries, there is a need to, again, to do something which is called massive knowledge sharing. Again, there might be 3 or 4 talks describing the potentials unfolding here, but practically using the motto of Jack Welch, founder of Wikipedia. His dream is, and he is on the right track to implement his deal, that all the knowledge available globally is available to all. So this is the world where we are even right now. And massive knowledge sharing has dimensions we have not still experimented with. Wikinomy of commons, this is a phrase coined by a poor Hungarian with limited knowledge of English. Wikinomy of commons mean to use what massive knowledge sharing and mass collaboration might enable us to do to deploy for resolving global challenges and transboundary problems. As for the modalities, how the economy might move in a direction of a New Deal globally done, first of all, it will have to be market-based. And it will have to be addressed by people, unlike me, who know how the real market works. But there are efforts, some of them are being discussed, some of them were controversial, but there were efforts in the environmental area, how to turn certain efforts into market-based, and because of that, sustainable efforts. Until we leave these issues outside the real economy, these issues will be approached as a philanthropy, as a corporate social responsibility. Both of them are welcome, both of them are good, but none of the two are sufficient to address the issues. So we need market-based principles to make sustainable, to resolve the issues ahead of us. 3M, footprinting. I think from the climate change area, it might be clear what I mean. To model a problem, to measure a problem, before we start thinking about the mitigation of the problem. And both the modeling and the mitigation is not present. It's absent in practically many of the 17 areas which are right now approached in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. With only 69 targets, the only problem is we do not know where we are. At the same time, we would like to be somewhere, but since we do not know where we are, it's very difficult to define where we would like to be. Of course, if I recall Alice from the Wonderland, if you don't know where you go, all the roads are leading there. This is not relevant for the SDGs. Prioritization. I think it's absolutely clear that what we are speaking about is a task which would require financial and human resources right now not available, right now unthinkable. We have to undertake this approach progressively, which would require a prioritization. Prioritization can only be done on modeling and measuring. And once there is a modeling and measuring, of course, the more complicated thing is to see the relationship between different areas. How to compare different areas is not easy. How not to compare them, it's easy. But we have to prioritize because the payoff in certain areas might be higher for 1 unit of investment. The best return mitigation is the point here, to deploy progressively the resources in a way where the return in terms of improved management of global challenges is the highest. On the modalities of how to move intergovernmental organizations to a New Deal situation, matrix UN system, what I mean by that? I mean a world of intergovernmental organizations where the walls between them are torn down. There is a possibility to move issue-wise, people-wise, effort-wise, project-wise in between organizations. This is not totally new, but this is right now a very insignificant percentage of the activities of those organizations. Shadow organizations, it was intended to be a positive word. I'm not sure whether I managed to achieve it or not. But the idea is that through mass knowledge sharing, through what I called the wikinomia of the commons, practically there is a huge unprecedented support layer behind each and every theme. World Health Organization, Médecins Sans Frontières is a good example. I don't think anymore we are speaking about a shadow organization. Médecins Sans Frontières is outshining and did outshine the World Health Organization in the context of the Ebola. So this is an example what, again, a collaboration which is as informal as it was and remains for Médecins Sans Frontières can create as a challenge, can represent a wake-up call for the organizations, can help the intergovernmental community to improve and reinvent itself as a result of the competition as well. Global knowledge and global tasks available to everyone. I tried to paraphrase the motto which is at the gate of Wikipedia. Practically to make available all the tools which are required to take part in resolving the global transboundary challenges in the context of this New Deal. To make it easily accessible, to make it accessible in a way where it's sustainable for the people involved. So we are not asking those young people to remain a slave under the notion of internship. We have an army of interns. These are people unpaid for, and these are people who are practically slaving for the economy and for the business community. The ease of putting the tools in the hands of those people is unprecedented today. Let me finish before we fix an issue. All-inclusive organizations, another modality. Merit-based organization, another important defining feature. And this might be a contradiction of terms, but internationalizing the intergovernmental organizations. There is a tendency where some of these organizations and some of these activities are too much fragmented along national cracks. There is a need to stop it. There is a need to reverse it and to put the internationalized back in the activities of those organizations, merit-based and all-inclusive. So these are the dimensions: people, economy, and intergovernmental organizations, along which we will have to think ahead. Hopefully, we will not face a dire strait as severe as it was historically. Independent whether we face it or not, we will have to move there. As history teaches us, of course, big changes are coming only after big calamities. And to a certain degree, it's a part of how our brain is wired, but our brain is wired in a way which is distinctive for the human race compared to the rest of the world. I don't think that we should act just on the basis of raw fear. And this is what differentiating us, and this is why I am hopeful and I am optimistic that this global New Deal is the deal for us. Thank you. After you survive this long talk, I give the opportunity to
Well, first of all, I would like to thank your ambassador for such a comprehensive and penetrating analysis of the current trends and the situation. I don't think that there is much that I could add to such a profound analysis. I would just make a few remarks. What is disruptive leadership? When we are talking about leadership, we are thinking about the transition to the future. So when we are talking about transformative leadership, it's something that helps us, makes the transition smoother and faster. In that way, disruptive leadership is a leadership that is doing quite the opposite, in fact. Meaning that it slows down the transition, makes it more painful and difficult for the people. But the picture is not that black and white, may I say, because any leader is a human being, and in the different stages of activity of a leader, there might be elements of transformational change and leadership, and there may be elements of disruptive leadership. And I can give you the examples from, many historical records when this has happened, and even with the person whom I respect endlessly, President Gorbachev, there were elements of disruptive leadership. He is also human. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to diagnose whether it's disruptive or transformative when you live through this period, because only history can qualify the vector of the activity of this or that leader, whether it was a disruptive or transformative. I think that certainly, but there are certainly a couple of things that could help us to differentiate disruptiveness from transformative leadership at the time of the decision-making process. One of the clear symptoms that the leadership becomes disruptive is when the goal starts to justify any means. Because it looks like a, shortcut to achievement of the goal. But finally, at the end of the day, it takes you much further from the goal itself. And in fact, the worst thing about disruptive leadership is the corruption of the people and the corruption of the values in the society. Because that disrupts the pace of the transition into the future and just brings back any society decades and decades back in the development tempo. And there are lots of examples of that. I will give you just a few. In my country, I think that today Russia goes through exactly the stage of disruptive leadership. And the immediate effect of that is the corruption of the people. I mean, corruption, yes, and values and people. One example I shared, I think, yesterday at the dinner, but it was a very narrow group. But you know that recently President Putin said that at the time when Crimea events took place, he was considering putting on alert nuclear potential of Russia. Obviously, the media responded to that with different polls and everything. And one of the radio stations made a poll. What is the fraction of the population that would support that? You know that after the end of the Cold War, and there were agreements, and the nuclear potentials of all the sites were de-alerted. That means that the targeting was sort of put aside, that they do not keep the missiles already fueled or on a very short term. So it takes time, and therefore it creates a lag of reconsidering the different, not very clever decisions. But anyway, 25% of the people that participated in the poll support the possibility of using nuclear weapons in order to defend national interests as they consider it, including Crimean question. In fact, that is a clear symptom of the corrupted, let me say, values of the society in the country. This is the result. I can tell you that, unfortunately, he is not alone. I mean, the Russian leader. We have today the problems with disruptive leadership practically all over the world. And I think that the real reason is the lack of the New Deal, unifying idea that could bring the world forward. Take it forward. The problem is that the tempo, the speed of change, is putting the leaders in a very difficult situation. In addition, this is practically the first time, I would say in history, that the decisions of the leaders must be taken within the framework of the international and, humanity goals, not just national agendas. And the leaders, first, they're not ready to that. Second, the frameworks of the decision makings do not provide the necessary conditions for that. And as a result, leaders either simply overwhelmed by the change which is going on the international arena, and sometimes leaders are ready to try to fry the eggs on the volcano, which they are doing just to cash the advantages immediately, let me say. I would like to come back to something which it is of course disputable, but in my judgment, I think that, for instance, the period of after the end of the Cold War in the Western and specifically in the American politics was very disruptive. I talked already about, wrong conclusions, wrong assessment, let me say, which was done at that time about thinking that self-destruction of the Soviet Union was the victory of the West pressure on the Soviet Union. I think that the problem is also that the West at that point devalued one of the most efficient instruments of its politics, and that is the soft power. And instead of continuing using the soft power, and I mean the soft power, the best, the most attractive characters of the Western system, I mean the efficiency, the the real dedication to the human rights and freedom. And that created a very attractive image of the West in the whole world. And I must say that this soft power also contributed to what happened in the Soviet Union, but not the hard pressure on the arms race, etc., etc. It was not a real reason for or economic pressure. It didn't work. But the wrong conclusions were drawn from this analysis. And I remember that right after the Clinton coming to power, Condoleezza Rice, she published a very, I would say, seminal article in Foreign Policy. And the message was, now it is American challenge and task to change the world with the spread of the democratic values around the world. You know, it was clear even at that time that any missionary attempts, they will not work. And this was practically, maybe in words, different from, of course, communist missionary attempts. But by the results, this missionary attempt to spread the values of democracy around the world led to the same, result, in fact. Because whenever missionary aim is formulated, inevitably means are forgotten. Goal justifies anything. And it was clear that, for instance, the only place where the freedom of hands of this implementation of this policy was limited was actually the Security Council of the United Nations. And in order to bypass, clearly it was necessary to make it dysfunctional. And to achieve that, the Yugoslav scenario, we know how it happened, and then the British war in Iraq, also without the Security Council. So it was sort of put aside, marginalized. But in fact, this created the opposite, let me say, impact, because both actions, they did not resolve any of the real international problems. They simply created new problems at that time. And in addition to that, it created, let me say, an international opposition to the United States and generally to the West. It is not incidental that the awakening of the Islamic fundamentalism happened immediately after that. Immediately. Because worldwide people found out that the West has ceased to be something attractive, worth of replication in their lifestyles. And even the way of the immigration of the people from the third world into the West changed. Before that, people were coming because they saw in the Western lifestyles something which needs to be followed up because it's bringing not just material success. It is also very important, but not only. It gave, the leg of the freedom of their activity, beliefs, and everything. But after that, the immigration changed because the majority were coming simply for material improvement of their life, but they did not want to integrate to that lifestyles. That created already the problems inside the West. And today, multiculturalism, problems that we have everywhere in Europe, a lot of problems of that kind were born by this attempt to resolve different issues by the hard power rather than by the soft power. I think that maybe I'm wrong, but I think that in history there will be a sort of, connection of what was done with the multilateralism right after the end of the Cold War, and what has happened as an implication of this process further. What can be done? Well, of course, I do not know the clear recipe, and no one knows. It's very difficult to put the toothpaste into the tube back when it was already squeezed out. But generally, we need a kind of a safety net that could prevent sliding the world into the worst chaos which could be imaginable. And for that matter, of course, we need multilateralism, but multilateralism of a new kind. I've already mentioned the network multilateral system, but in addition, it should be based not on the shared interests, but shared exposures to the threats and dangers of current day and the future as well. But also, it should put a unifying goal of development, a kind of a new deal, a perestroika, global perestroika, it doesn't matter how you call it, but comprehensive agenda that could motivate different stakeholders and key players to participate in that. Because if you will think about the goals of different nations, they are quite determinable, let me say. It is very important to articulate, formalize these goals within the multilateral system, and then to look for a unifying agenda that could put together all the countries and make this movement together more advantageous, more interesting for the key stakeholders than playing unilaterally on the modern world. Well, this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
This alarm function was the Gary alarm function on my phone, so we have a bit 5 minutes to carry forward the discussion. So let's go around the table.
First of all, unbelievable two contributions. Unbelievable by the shortness of it, and unbelievable by the wideness of it at the same time. When you talked about the coincidence, that coincidence of the Islamic upheaval, and there's a wonderful and world-renowned historian, Karen Armstrong, who said just the same, and that we cannot blame all these people in the Islamic world that they get to action and they react to what has been inflicted upon them. And I want just to share that website, charterforcompassion.org. So she received in 2008 the TED Prize, and she said her response was, I wish that you would help the creation, launch and propagation of a charter for compassion based on the fundamental principles of universal justice and respect. Thank you.
So, I just want to emphasize this thing about the new paradigm in way how to solve the problems. First of all, I would say that the conflicts made the world jump into the new spheres. So whenever conflict showed up, we had some technological revolution, we had some start of new technologies, we have some way out. So the world is full of conflict, even now. In lackness of the solution, world leaders, especially leaders of different world countries, its overall approach, they are trying, to deal with populism, making and initiate conflict with because they don't have a solution. There is no solution in economic term, and there is no solution in global sustainability. So, what do I think that we need to do? Like somehow that you mentioned, New Deal or a net, how do you call it, global net organization, something that can be distractor of, of focus for the global citizen, and something that can be seed for global citizens. We had this sharing of one idea in Podgorica while I was academy in Podgorica 1 year ago. It's like idea, but it's only idea, of creating a United Nations National Citizen Assembly, which will not only represent the states that which will represent and citizens of all the world, like the assembly of the citizens, but it needs to be, delegate some authorities to that national assembly, supranational assembly, and it needs to be empowered to resolve some global issues. Maybe with that kind of institutions, that citizens of all over the world can address their issues, could give a hope to, to a global lack of trust and global, mistrust in world institutions and in world leaders, which behave disruptive in a lot of countries all over the world, basically because of lack of the solution that I asked. So it's mine.
Thank you. Well, I think that one of the problems why it seems that there is no real chance to establish New Deal in foreseeable future is the fact that unipolar moment, which became reality after the end of the Cold War, was misunderstood by Condoleezza Rice, for instance, and we have known that those neo-conservative circles were the most influential in American politics in era of President Bush's son. So it seems that American power elites they forgot that soft power was much more influential instrument in the solution of Soviet Union than hard power. And if I'm supposed to give advice, I would say to lead does not necessarily mean to impose.
Yes, thank you very much, all of you, for this very macro view of systemic crisis. And if I try to summarize one of your thoughts, you said, so far we have evolved because of crisis. Crisis made a disruptive situation, allowing destructive leadership, etc. So quantum leaps. So I wanted, not at a macro, but at a micro level, ask myself the question, can we change before the crisis? And first of all, I wanted to ask myself, okay, what are the good reasons why we change when we face fear? And I remind myself of the very basic military training. How can our military force can support days of work, days of stress, etc. And having been trained in some techniques, I know that privation of sleep, massive destruction of identity, putting people at such level of fear that every fuse just burns, generates physiological ability to create something new. In the literature, it is called negative trance states. So we put the mind into such stress that anything fuses and new ability arise, such as resistance to fatigue, creativity, and all this. So that's a very reptilian hereditate capacity that we use, and I believe that explains why, facing huge crises, such a number of people, for some weeks, some months during the crisis can evolve. So my question was, can we change before the crisis? I just said, okay, why? And I mentioned some modified state of consciousness to try to understand why. And now we all know that the mental understanding is not enough to trigger a reaction. I mean, we all are very educated, very smart, but we know that it's not enough. The mental, rational, intelligence is not enough to change. So now the question is, can the equivalence of a negative trance state be obtained in a secure and safe environment? And the answer is yes, of course. And there are lots of proof, scientific proof, surgery made for all the ones that are resistant to anesthesia. Hypnosis allows people to get heart operations, and absolutely amazing operations can be done just by hypnosis. So the science has proved that modified states of consciousness allow, so generated by the voice of someone, allows the same kind of physical ability that negative trance states that are obtained by fear and crisis. So my point is, can we change before the crisis? Yes. How? Probably to modified state of consciousness, but of course that has to be trained. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just an observation. It's very convincing to me, Alexander's expression when he said shared exposure. I really like this expression. I think it suggests that this could be a method of response, a response to global disruption and to corruption. I think that this concept of shared exposure and clear understanding of what shared exposure means would be a very daunting task, but worth exploring. Because shared exposure means also shared risks and opportunities. And this is what I think is relevant. We need to analyze what this shared exposure means. Based obviously on self-evident, even anecdotal, empirical evidence and assessments that could be conducted everywhere. So I really think that your suggestion in terms of way forward, it's a very positive and understandable also. I think it could be culturally vehiculated across continents and places.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Tibor. Thank you, Alexander. I believe you have set the stage for one of the next topics, anticipation. You have laid the foundation of the current situation, even though we might not exactly know where we are. I think deep inside of us, we know what doesn't work, we know where the risks are, we know where the opportunities are. And we all have it as a gut feel, as a heart feel, as a new mindset feel. We can sense where the direction is going to a better to be. And even though it might not be scientific, art will help us, and science will also guide us. But anticipation should really be based on the soft power and some hard power. But the soft power needs to harmonize it. And the soft power is the one that will guide our hearts and minds. Hope and love-based decisions will probably lead us to the right anticipation. Creating quantum leaps, I believe, is still, to make the parallel to physics, the way to disruption. It is a new deal, but it is not disrupting by killing what was before, by avoiding and saying that everything was bad. It is learning from it, and Alexander, you have given us many examples of what too much hard power can lead us into. And we need to mitigate soft and hard power to really move into something that allows us to thrive all together, the 9 billion plus people on the planet. And Tibor, it's amazing that on a matrix of 9 cells, you can tell us where the major crises are and where the major challenges are, and at the same time, the opportunities to get out of the situation where we are. I also appreciated the how on the IGO's cell, that actually what you have described there, many business organizations, many private companies have actually used all these examples that you have, of proposals that you are giving. And I think the sharing of this experience of the private companies to bring that experience, that knowledge to the world, to the IGOs and NGOs and all the other organizations. If we can transfer that knowledge and experience, then we will probably unleash more human potential, societal potential, social potential, and organizational potential. And that's what I wish we can all do together, by working together, meeting more often, and relating in a different way. Thank you.
I think it's the best moment to conclude. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.